must persevere till the end. That Jesus has to be the center of everything that our life has been about. And so we take a few moments to look at the gospel this morning, and it's important to keep in your mind when we look at the gospel this morning that for the Jews, when they were listening to this gospel, it had a very particular meaning for them because they believed in what they called 3 ages or 3 days. And the first age was the present age, the days we're living in now, where there's a lot of dysfunction, there's a lot of violence. These days are unredeemable. These are days when there's a lot of discord and a lot of hatred. And then there is the last day. And the last day is supposed to be the day when God comes in his glory, the Jews are raised up, and everyone believes. And then there is the second age, the middle day. And that's the age between the first and the last. And that's what they're talking about in the gospel today. It's the time when there is a lot of struggle going on because the old age, the present age is dying, the new age is coming, and so we're in this terrible struggle where there will be earthquakes and violence and nation against nation and brother against brother. That's what the Jews have in mind, and they understood what Jesus was talking about very clearly in that gospel. And then, as we continue to look at that, if you look at some scripture scholars, Bishop Barron tells us he looks at these 3 days and he says, all of this is changed because of the resurrection of Jesus. And so he says, what that all means is that whole business about the temple and the temple falling and nothing be standing on top of the temple, he says that's a sign for the Jews that their whole world is shaken and fallen down because Jesus has come and Jesus is raised from the dead. The resurrection has turned everything upside down. And then he says, you look at this business about nations against nations and people against people, and he says that shakes down the whole political system of the Jews. Person against person, nation against nation. He says the whole political system has been turned upside down because Jesus has come and he has risen from the dead. Nothing that they expected. And then he says, you look at all this stuff about earthquakes. We talk about climate change and all the things that are happening today. It's cold in the south and warm in the north. And he says, all of that speaks about, again, that even creation is shaken by the fact that Jesus has been raised from the dead. And that there is a new age and a new beginning with the resurrection and new life. And so all of this, when we look at all of this, the question then for you and me this morning is very simply, is Jesus the center of my life? Is Jesus who my life is all about? Or is my life about other things? Because you see, when all of these things transpire, however they transpire, because remember Jesus tells us in the gospel, nobody knows the day or the hour except the Father in heaven. When all of these things transpire, in the end, the question will be, have I persevered in my belief in Jesus and his resurrection? And that perseverance means that in my life, in your life, there will be persecution. There will be persecution. The gospel is very clear. People will hate me. People will not like what I'm saying. Household will be against household. Will there be persecution? There will be persecution in my life if I'm following Jesus. And so the first question this morning, my sisters and brothers, every one of us in here has to ask herself, himself, is there persecution in my life because of my faith and because of my belief in Jesus Christ? And if there is no persecution, then I have to ask myself, am I really a true disciple of Jesus? Is Jesus really the center and the motivation of my life? Because you see, as a Christian, as a disciple, my life has to be transformed into Jesus Christ. And the values of the gospel are values that are directly opposed to everything that goes on in our world. The gospel speaks about the sanctity of marriage, the sanctity of family, the sanctity of life, the sanctity of being kind and compassionate to one another, the sanctity of caring for those who are less fortunate. The gospel speaks about all of those things. And the world tells us something entirely different. And so am I being transformed into the values of the gospel? Or am I living just like everybody else in the world, and therefore there is no persecution, and so am I really a disciple of Jesus? And the second thing that is very important is that if I am a disciple of Jesus, and I'm living in this age where there are all kinds of things going on, it's a dysfunctional age. If I am being transformed into Jesus, then I am a light in this dark age. My life, your life, should be giving hope to people. Because we believe in Jesus and we believe that Jesus has overcome the darkness. That sin and death have no power over us. And therefore, our life is a light into a world that's very confused. And so we have to ask ourselves, is my life a light in this world? And how is that light showing? How am I proclaiming the love of God in this world? Because God sent his son because he loves us. And so how am I proclaiming the love of God, the love of Christ in this world? By the witness of my life. Am I a light in this darkness? Some of us may recall in the early 1990s, after the wall fell in Europe, and countries were experiencing their freedom. We might recall especially the difficulties that occurred in the then Yugoslavia when Tito was taken out of power and Yugoslavia fell into war. The Croats against the Serbs and the Bosnians. It was a terrible war from 1992 to 1996. Sarajevo became the center of so much of that, and many of us could remember reading about that and hearing about that. In 1992, between 1992, late 1992, early 1993, the war was going on, bombs were being thrown, everything was. We look at pictures of Gaza today, and we see all of that destruction, and that's what it was like in Bosnia. Terrible destruction. No food, no water, people were starving. And one day, there was a group of people on a bread line getting some food. 22 of them. They were waiting to get some food, and all of a sudden, a bomb came and exploded right there where they were. The 22 of them were killed. In a nearby tenement lived the world-renowned celloist, Vedran Smoljovac. Seeing all of that horror and all of that disruption, and feeling that he had to do something to give people hope and light, the next day, in the midst of all that rubble and bombs and everything else, the next day he got dressed up in his tuxedo. And he took his cello and he went outside right in the middle of that rubble. And he played a magnificent piece on the cello. And all of the suffering people around were taken up with the music and listening. He did that for 22 days, every day, in honor of the 22 people that were killed that day in the bread line. He dressed in his tuxedo, took his cello, and came down into the middle of the rubble and played a magnificent song. My sisters and brothers, that's our job. We live in a world that's dark and that's in rubble. And that's lost because Christ is lost. And in the middle of this rubble, being transformed into Christ and being light, you and I are called to get dressed up and to go into this darkness and this rubble and where there is despair, and to bring beauty and light and hope, because that's what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. Am I doing that? Are you doing that? God bless you.